Have your Bible this evening. Turn with the book of Mark. Book of Mark, chapter 7. Mark 7. When you get there, you're going in standing. Mark 7. I'm going to start reading in verse 1. Then came together unto him the Pharisees and certain of the scribes which came from Jerusalem. When they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is to say, with unwashed hands, they found fault. So the Pharisees and all the Jews except they wash their hands all, eat not, holding the tradition of the elders. And when they came from the market, except they wash, they eat not, and many other things there be, which they have received to hold, as the washing of cups and pots and brazen vessels and of tables. And the Pharisees and scribes said unto him, or asked him, why walk not thy disciples according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? He answered and said to them, well hath Isaiah the prophet prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandment of God, ye hold the tradition of men, as the washing of pots and cups, and many other such like things ye do. He said unto them, full well ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your own tradition. For Moses said, honor thy father and thy mother, and whoso curses father or mother, let him die to death. But he said, but ye say, if a man shall say to his father or mother, it is korban, that is to say, a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, ye shall be free. Ye suffer him no more to do aught for his father or his mother, making the word of God of none effect, through your tradition, which ye have delivered, and many such like things ye do ye. When he had called all the people unto him, he said unto them, hearken unto me, every one of you, and understand. There is nothing from within out a man that entereth into him can defile him, but the things which come out of him, those are they that would defile the man. If any man have ears to hear, let him hear. And when he was entered into the house from the people, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. He said to them, are ye also so without understanding also? Do ye not perceive whatsoever thing from without entereth into a man, it cannot defile him, because it entereth not into his heart, but into the belly, and goeth out into the draught, purging all meats. That which cometh out of the man, that defileth the man. For from within, that out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adultery, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these things, these evil things, come from within and defile the man. Follow with us today from the blessings, Lord. Have your way. Well, it helps so we might understand what you're showing us here tonight. Help us, Lord, that it might aid us in our understanding of you. Guide us with your purpose. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen. There are times that when we come together on Sunday morning, there's a lot of things, like even this morning, that as I was sitting there, I was looking at the songs that were being sung, how they would tie into the message, and even how they would tie into things like the songs that I would have picked out. I don't know that I mentioned this morning, but I thought about not only 6, but I thought about 222 as well. And those songs, how they would affect the message. But I also note oftentimes how that in the morning service, things are said that are done or sung that have to do with the evening message. It was a young man this morning stood somewhere about this place right here who made a comment about not often, sometimes drifting in the midst of a message. And he made a comment that he get off on other things. He was talking about one of the things he got an off on. And thinking about people who aren't here anymore, where they would have said and different things. I had another person tell me something after the service, very, very similar, that they sometimes get distracted and don't always hear everything I say. I was thinking about this message here earlier. I guess it was Friday afternoon. Sybil had gotten home. She was tired. Listen, she was drifting in and out of sleep, okay? You know, that kind of stuff. And I asked her if what she knew about the tradition of the elders. And she indicated she really didn't know a whole lot. And so I was going through some of the information I'm going to try to give you tonight. And then I asked her, do you understand what I'm saying? And she gave me back a piece of what I said, but it indicated she had no understanding of what I said. She was drifting in and out of sleep. The reason why I said that is, if you don't pay attention tonight, you're going to miss something. In fact, that's the reason why he said, in this chapter, and it seems like he keeps on coming back to this fall, but in this chapter, in verse 14, hearken and understand. And in verse 16, if a man have ears to hear, let him hear. There are some things in this message tonight that I think if you understand it, and if you remember it, it will help you see what's going on in the narrative throughout the Gospels. Between when Christ comes into interaction with the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, those who are coming from Jerusalem. It's not the problems, he's not having these problems typically in Galilee. It's with this bunch that has come up out of Jerusalem, okay? And so when we get there in just a minute, I want you to know something else before we start. The disciples still really haven't had their little rest, okay? They come back and they told Christ, says, listen, you know, this is what we taught, this is what we healed these people, and he says, you come away for a little bit and rest a while, and they got in a boat, which means they had to work to get to where they're going. And when they got there was people waiting on them already, and they had to attend to them, they had to feed the 5,000, they ministered to those people, and then they got on a boat, and Christ went on a mountain. And the whole time they were out in the water, they were fighting the currents and the winds and rowing because the winds weren't going to take them where they want to go. And by the way, they didn't ever go where they were going. They went to Gennesaret. Bethsaida, where they were going, is up here, and Gennesaret was down here. Turn around for you. It was down here. And so they were going to Gennesaret. And now they got to Gennesaret, and as soon as they got out of the boat, the people recognized him. And they started going about getting people to come around to be healed. And the Bible goes on and says in the latter part of that previous chapter that they were going from every place they went, from village. They're traveling, they're ministering, they're constantly going. There's no rest. I don't know how many days have passed, but there's been some days that have passed before we get to this chapter. I mention all that because you ever just get tired? Some of you know what I'm talking about. Some of you are old enough to know what I'm talking about. How many have ever worked in the, and I know some of you have done the hard stuff besides this, but how many have ever worked in that hay field with square bales?
You ever know how you go out there and you're picking that bell up, and you sometimes you use that leg. You ever do that? And if there's a rock in that field, it has been put in that bell, and it's in that place where it hits your knee. You know what I'm talking about? You grab that thing, you put it up there on the, and after a while you get dusty and sweaty, and the dust that's covering you, and the sweat that's covering you means you're covered in mud. You know what I'm saying? All that stuff's in your hair, it's on your clothes, it's all over your arms and your hands, it's up your nose, it's in your ears, it's in your eyes, it's in your throat. You know what I'm talking about. And if you're doing a lot of hay, and you've been going, if the hay field's not close to the barn, at some point in the day, you probably have swung into an old general store and got you a bologna sandwich with a big old slice of bologna that thick and a piece of tomato that thick and it's slathered on with mayonnaise and 2 pieces of white bread, and you get in that truck and you get you a cold drink, that cold drink is sweating. Making you thirsty, isn't it? Sorry, Marty. And you open that thing up and you drink some of it and your hands just wet with that sweat off that bottle and all that dirt. And you grab that sandwich and you're eating. That white bread, not white anymore. And you're eating and you're enjoying that thing. You're on the way to back to the field and you got this thing gone before you ever get there and you're consuming the sandwich. You're inhaling it, okay? And then when you get through, you've been drinking some of that cold drink and you got that sandwich consumed and you look at your hand and there's mayonnaise on your hand. It's too much to wipe your pants yet. Okay? So you get it off. And then you wipe what's left on your pants. You've been there. I can tell by the way you giggle. You're just thinking about all that dirt you just ate. We was in a hayfield one time and outside Columbia in a little community called McCain's. The hayfield was close to the barn, but also close to the hayfield was the field where Mr. Claudia Irvin had planted his garden. And as we was doing the hay, there was a beautiful red tomato hanging off a vine. And one of the guys went over and grabbed that tomato right in the middle of in between bales, okay? And he gulped down that tomato while he was juices everywhere. You know he got a lot of dirt, in his belly that day. Well, to some degree, I think the disciples are here, okay? They're tired. They've been going. They've got some food, and they want it in their belly so they can keep going. Understand the problem that has happened. The Pharisees seeing this, they have come up from Jerusalem. They're in Gennesaret still, by the way. We're told in the book of Matthew that they're still in Gennesaret. They're right there. They haven't really left that area. They're still in Gennesaret. And the Pharisees have come up and from Jerusalem, I guess, to see what's going on. They've heard probably rumors. And they've watched. They've watched the disciples get some food. And without washing, they have consumed the food. And then they have a problem. And they use the term, do not your disciples honor the tradition of the elders. And many people, I've heard different people give different understandings of what this is. You got to be careful, because you got to understand what it is in order to understand what's going to be said. It is not the law. First of all, it is not the law. I watched a couple of videos this weekend. Don't get Saturday. No, it may be Friday. Anyway, I watched a couple of videos because I wanted to see what some other people were saying at the time, and it was kind of fun to watch some of them. There is one thought that some people have. They said the tradition of the elders puts up a hedge around the wall, and that's in a sense, in some ways, that can be an understanding of what it does. And what they mean is that if this is the law, then by putting up these little areas of protection, you won't cross this, so therefore you can't do that. Okay? If it is, I can't give a good reason. Well, let me give you an example of the Bible. Okay? I'll just do that.
Here's the good one. In Exodus 28 to 11, we are told that they're in the law to refrain from working on the Sabbath. In Matthew, in chapter 12, they include in that the idea of harvesting is work. And you would agree, if you work in the hayfield, you know harvesting hay especially is work. Plucking a handful of grain is harvesting. Therefore, Jesus' disciples were guilty of breaking the Sabbath by eating some grain plucked from the fields as they passed through. Healing is the work of a physician. Therefore, one cannot heal on the Sabbath. That in some sense is putting a hedge about the law said don't work on the Sabbath. So let's see how can we define this to keep us from breaking that? So they put this hedge. You can't walk but so many miles. If you walk more than that, you're working. You understand? And so in that sense, yes, they're putting up a hedge. But not everything is a hedge. Some things are perversion of the law. And so I don't think that's a good analogy. Okay? Don't think of the tradition of the elders as a hedge, because some things are not a hedge. Some things are perversion of the law. The example he gives him here is a perversion of the law, not a hedge around the law. Okay? I'm pulling somewhere for that. Oh. So I watched one of the videos I watched was of a man who is a practicing Orthodox Jew. Okay? That is, he basically practiced the religion for the Pharisees and the Sadducees and those in Judea time were worshiping, okay? Same basic. And he was talking about the tradition of the elders. He's trying to explain it. Now, understand that every organization's claims about the origin of themselves and about the things that they believe aren't always true, okay? It's just their claim. The Catholics claim that Peter is the first pope. But Peter was dead before the papal system ever came to be, okay? And there's other things that another organization I can mention, but I'm not going to go there. So what he said was that when Moses came off the mountain, that he came down with two laws. He came down with a written law, and he came down with an oral law, or an oral tradition, and an unwritten law to explain that law. Okay? Now hang on, because he says some other things that contradict that, okay? But he said that's where the oral tradition comes from. He then also said that the oral tradition is also, and I did say oral tradition, not just tradition of the elders, because it is an oral tradition. It is known as an oral tradition, not just the tradition of the elders. And it's not even, well, I'm not going to get ahead of myself. But he says that also, over time, rabbis, which is part of their job as teachers of the law, began to debate the law, to come to some understanding of what the meaning was. And in their debating, they would sometimes introduce thoughts that they would immediately would throw out, and sometimes that were debated for a while and then thrown out, knowing the whole time they were going to throw it out, okay? And the reason why I mention that, because it's part of that tradition. And he says that would explain why there's some things in the tradition of the elders that are not, that some people think are weird. And by the way, there are some things in there really, really not more than weird, okay? The reason why how I know that is because in the second century, they took the tradition of the elders and they wrote them down. And I can only imagine that part of the reason for this is because they were afraid they would lose the tradition of the elders. Jerusalem had been destroyed in 70 AD, during the first century. And so in the second century, they wrote down the tradition of the elders, so they would, and it's called, the book is called the Talmud. And he held up one, and he said 740 pages, and they do that's wrong. It's however many pages it was. They do, if you do one, I forget what he said on that part, but anyway, he held a book up that was that tall, that wide, and that thick. Okay? This is the Talmud. The issue
is that Talmud, if you understand what's being said, I'm going to go through this in a minute, is replacing the law. It's not the law, but it's replacing the law. And it's what Judaism oftentimes goes by. It's what Christ was dealing with. He was butting his head against was this tradition of the elders, this oral tradition that was, at the time wasn't even written down. And it was and again, there's some things in there that is really weird. And weird is a kind word. And he said that just because it's in there, don't mean that that's what they're debating an idea, and that's not what they do. Okay? Let me show you some things. I've dealt with some things in my notes already. I just need to see where I'm at. Look at verse 6. I want to show you that's what I dealt with the hedge around the law, and it's not really. I dealt with the idea of what Judaism claims, the dual authority, a rabbinical debate, was written down in the 2nd century, so I've covered some of the things in my note. Let me take you to what Jesus says, starting in verse 6. Well hath Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honoreth me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. He says here, this tradition of the elders is lip service. I may boil it down to the 3 words, or 2 words, but it is lip service. That's all it is. He also says, in verse 7, howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. In other words, this didn't come from God. You can say all you want, that Moses came off the mountain with another with an oral law to explain the written law. But it didn't come from God. It's a commandment of man. In fact, he says again in verse 8, for laying aside the commandment of God, ye hold the tradition of men as the washing of pots and cups, or like things ye do. Now let me show you something, because he's not going to deal with that directly. He says that this idea of washing of hands is part of man's tradition. I want you to understand what they're talking about. They're not talking about you're not supposed to wash your hands, okay? You're not supposed to wash your pots and your tables and stuff like that. He's not saying that. What they've done is they've taken the ceremonial washing from the temple. The laver, they're supposed to go as they to enter the temple, they're supposed to wash their hands a certain way, and then they're talking about a ceremonial washing, and they're taking it. Listen, this was something that only the priest going into the temple was supposed to, or the tabernacle was supposed to do. It wasn't everybody supposed to, but the ceremonial washing, and they have spread it across all Israel. Everybody is to wash ceremoniously. Everybody is to wash not only their hands ceremoniously, but their pots and their pans ceremoniously, their table ceremoniously. Everything is being washed ceremoniously. In other words, the idea is that they might sanctify and worship this process. And the disciples didn't do a ceremonial washing. I kind of get the idea in my mind that not many people in Galilee did so. It was kind of stuck down there in Judea. But being the disciples of a rabbi, it was their thoughts that they should do so. Let me take you a look further. Verse 9. He says, and to them full well you reject the commandment of God that you may keep your tradition. You understand what he just said? The tradition of men that they're doing, the oral tradition, the tradition of the elders they're following, is a rejection of the Word of God. It's a rejection of the law of God. In order to follow the tradition of the elders, they had to reject the Word. That tells me again, that's not a hedge. That's not a hedge.
Look at verses 10 to 13. Let me show you what he says in this example. For Moses said, honor thy father and thy mother, and whoso curses father or mother, let him die the death. Okay, that you remember in the Ten Commandments, honor thy father and thy mother. This is what the tradition of the elders did. But ye say, if a man shall say unto his father or mother, it is forbane, that is, by, to understand this is a translation of what he said, it is a gift. By whosoever thou mightest be corrupted by me, he shall be free. And ye suffer him no more to do aught for his father or his mother, making the word of God of none effect through your tradition, which ye have delivered, and me such like things ye do ye. In other words, what they've done with this one in particular is they have annihilated the word of God. They have annihilated the law. They haven't put a hedge about it. They have destroyed it. It's gone. All you gotta say is, it's a gift. All you gotta do is come to the border and say, I'm seeking asylum. I stepped over my line there, didn't I? Got into politics. All you gotta do is just holler out this line, and you're free to do whatever. This no longer, you don't have to worry about your mom and dad no more, you're free of it. That's not the law. That's the destruction of the law. The tradition of the elders, that's what it does, in part. No hedge there. And then he comes over in verse 14 to 16 and says, and when he had called all the people unto him, he said unto them, hearken unto me, every one of you, and understand. There is nothing from within out of man that enters into him can defile him. But the things which come out of him, those are they that defile the man. If you have ears to hear, let him hear. He says it's not a matter of cleanness of the hands. It's a matter of cleanness of the heart. It's not, listen, you can eat all the bologna steak sandwiches you want, that big old slice of tomato and that mayonnaise, white bread. And you can eat them all you want while hauling hay. That isn't what defiles you. What defiles you is the condition of your heart. That's what Jesus says. I've already talked to you about what the disciples did, so I've gotten ahead of myself somewhat. So having said all that, let me take to one other thought, because after I got through all that in my mind, I got thinking, but wait a minute. What does he mean by defile? If what they're talking about doing is a ceremonial process, by the way, it was done as a way of declaring something holy, sanctified for service, then what does he mean by defile? And that's basically what I found. They felt like that when you had done this, you made yourself unholy, unpure, unsanctified, unable to be used. And you had to go back through the process. Christ says, you know what really makes you unholy? What really defiles you? It's not eating food with unwashed hands. Kids, don't take this message and say, Mom, I don't have to wash my hands no more. It is an unwashing heart that is the problem. Read the rest of the chapter again. And he entered the house in verse 17 from the people with his disciples, asked him concerning the parable. And he said to them, are you so without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatsoever thing from without enters into a man, it cannot defile him, because it entereth not into his heart, This is a eating process in anatomy here, okay? Don't go into the heart, but it goes into the belly and goes into the draw, purging all meats. So what you're eating in, what you're taking in is going out, okay? Being flushed in the system. And he said, that which cometh out of a man, that defileth a man. Kind of goes to the message this morning, doesn't it? Kind of walking in the light. For from within, out of the heart of man, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornication, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile the man. Well, I had something else to say, but I don't guess I do. Listen. We say it from time to time, but the condition of the heart is important. I've got an illustration for you. Went Tuesday to have my echocardiogram. And if you know what a good heart sounds like in an echocardiogram, if you have enough of those, you know what one sounds like. It's a, and that's a John Baker translation of that's an echocardiogram, not the stethoscope going up against your heart, but the echocardiogram, that little, doing an ultrasound of that little baby. And it's going, that's a good heart. Mine Tuesday was doing this right here. That's not a good heart, okay? And I already know that part of the problem that the chemo has damaged my heart. I have a stiffening of a heart. I'm becoming hard-hearted, okay? That's what's wrong with the Pharisees. They're hard-hearted. The tradition of the elders is making their heart hard. And they're trying to cover up their sin. They really are. But I'm becoming hard-hearted. And the stiffening of the heart is not, I imagine that Tuesday I'll be put on some different medicine. But listen, the only medicine for the hard-heartedness of the Pharisees, the blood of Jesus Christ. The blood going through my body, that heart's pumping. Listen, it's what it does. It's what it is. But that sin-sick heart, that one that's spiritual, the blood of Jesus Christ coursing through that vein, those spiritual veins, is what makes it right. It changes the heart. It changes the heart. The tradition of others can't do that. All it does is covers the guilt. It doesn't cover the sin. You hear a lot of times people want to talk about getting rid of the guilt. It's the only way to get rid of the guilt is get rid of the sin. The only way to get rid of the sin is to get paid for it. The only way to pay for it is the blood of Jesus Christ and show him Calvary. Let's get a song and everyone stand.